Have you ever noticed how the most successful people seem to accomplish extraordinary things while appearing almost effortless? They don't scramble. They don't exhaust themselves proving their worth. They simply calculate, wait, and strike with precision. And suddenly, everything falls into place. Now imagine if you stopped confusing motion with progress, if you understood that effort without strategy is just expensive noise. What do you think would happen? That's where the point lies. The world has sold you a lie that hustle equals value, that grinding yourself into dust is the price of success. But Niccolò Machiavelli knew something 5 centuries ago that most people still haven't figured out today. The wise man does at once what the fool does finally. Not more, not harder, just smarter. And that changes everything. You have been conditioned to believe that more effort equals more results. Work harder, stay longer, sacrifice more, prove yourself constantly. But here's a truth that perhaps no one has told you with this clarity. This exhausting performance is not productivity. It's a trap. And as long as you continue believing that your value lies in how hard you work, rather than how intelligently you move, you will be outmaneuvered by those who understand what Machiavelli understood. That power belongs to the efficient, not the exhausted. Do you know why? Because excessive effort signals desperation, and everything that reeks of desperation becomes exploitable. Your boss sees you staying late every night and thinks, I can squeeze more out of this one. Your clients sense you'll say yes to anything and they negotiate harder. Your competitors watch you burn energy on every small battle and they simply wait for you to collapse. But you don't see this because you're trapped in an illusion that being the hardest worker will make you the most valued. But it doesn't work that way. Machiavelli understood what Carl Jung would later call the shadow, the parts of reality we refuse to acknowledge. And the shadow truth of success is this: the world doesn't reward effort. It rewards results. And often, the biggest results come from the smallest, most precisely timed actions. Think about it. A general who fights every battle loses the war. A chess master who moves frantically loses to the player who waits. Nature itself operates on this principle. The lion doesn't chase every gazelle, just the right one at the right moment. Being constantly busy is a subtle form of self-deception. It's a disguised way of avoiding the harder work of thinking strategically, of making difficult choices, of sitting with the discomfort of doing nothing when nothing needs to be done. But this avoidance comes at a price, and the price is your energy being distributed as if effort itself were the goal, when in fact, impact is what matters. The person who works 12 hours and produces average results is not more valuable than the person who works 3 hours and produces something transformational. But we've been taught to worship the former while misunderstanding the latter. It's time to break that conditioning. Machiavelli didn't write The Prince to teach people how to work harder. He wrote it to teach them how to think clearer. And one of his most ruthless insights was this: never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception. Now, before you recoil at the word deception, understand what he really meant. Strategic efficiency. Why use a sledgehammer when a scalpel will do? Why exhaust yourself in open combat when positioning can win without a fight? The modern workplace worships what Jung called the persona, the mask of perpetual productivity. You perform busyness to be seen as valuable. You fill your calendar to appear important. You respond instantly to every email to seem indispensable. But this persona is killing you, because while you are performing effort, someone else is achieving actual results with a fraction of your energy, and they're getting promoted while you're getting burned out. Here's what most people miss about Machiavelli's philosophy. He wasn't advocating for laziness. He was advocating for ruthless prioritization, the ability to distinguish between what matters and what merely feels urgent, between strategic action and reactive motion, between real productivity and performative exhaustion. And this distinction is everything. Think about the last month of your life. How much of your effort actually moved the needle? How much was just motion without meaning? How much energy did you spend on tasks that someone else defined as important, rather than asking if they aligned with your actual goals? If you're honest, probably most of it. And that's the trap. Machiavelli observed that fortune favors those who adapt their strategy to circumstances, not those who simply try harder with the same failing approach. Yet most people, when something isn't working, just do more of it. They don't pause to recalibrate. They don't withdraw to reassess. They just add more hours, more effort, more stress, thinking that volume will eventually overwhelm the problem. This is what Freud would call repetition compulsion. Doing the same thing expecting different results, driven by unconscious patterns rather than conscious strategy. The cost of this unconscious busyness is enormous. You're not just wasting time, you're training the world to devalue you. When you make yourself available for every small task, you teach others that your time is cheap. When you respond to every crisis, you teach them that you'll always be there to clean up their mess. When you never say no, you teach them that your boundaries don't exist. And here's the cruelest point. The more available and hardworking you are, the less they respect you. Because what is too abundant becomes common. No one values what they don't have to earn. No one respects what's always accessible. Machiavelli knew this viscerally. He watched princes who tried to please everyone lose their kingdoms to those who knew when to be unavailable, when to withhold, when to let others scramble while they conserved their resources. It's not cruelty, it's nature. The sun doesn't shine on demand. The ocean doesn't explain its tides. Power operates on its own terms, not on the schedule of those who need it. So now stop and think. How much of your exhaustion is strategic and how much is just conditioning? How much of your busyness is moving you toward your goals and how much is just keeping you too occupied to question whether you're going in the right direction at all? Because if you don't learn to distinguish between effort and effectiveness, you'll work yourself to death and wonder why you never arrived anywhere worth reaching. So how do you break free from this cycle? How do you move from exhausted to effective, from reactive to strategic, from overworked to optimized? Machiavelli offers a path, but I'll warn you, it's uncomfortable. Because it requires you to stop performing productivity and start practicing discernment. But before we dive into the how, let's talk about why this is so difficult. You see, there's a reason the exhaustion model persists, even though it's clearly inefficient. It serves a psychological function. Being busy allows you to avoid the terrifying question, if I stopped all this motion, what would I actually be worth? It's easier to stay in constant motion than to sit with that uncertainty. Machiavelli observed that most people are more ready to repay an injury than a benefit because gratitude is a burden and revenge a pleasure. But I'd add this. Most people are more ready to exhaust themselves than to face themselves because busyness is a distraction and self-examination is uncomfortable. Jung spoke about the ego's defense mechanisms, the ways we protect ourselves from truths we're not ready to face. And perpetual busyness, that's one of the most socially acceptable defense mechanisms we have. You can't be criticized for working hard. You can't be judged for trying. Even if you're trying in completely the wrong direction, society will applaud your effort. It's a safe place to hide from the harder work of strategic thinking. But Machiavelli didn't write for people seeking safety. He wrote for those seeking power, effectiveness, results. First, you must embrace what Machiavelli called virtù, not virtue in the moral sense, but capability, strategic adaptability, the ability to see reality clearly and act accordingly. This means getting brutally honest about where your energy is actually going. Track your time for 1 week. Not what you think you're doing, but what you're actually doing. You'll be shocked. Most people spend 70% of their energy on tasks that contribute maybe 10% to their actual goals. They're majoring in minor things because it feels like progress. The Pareto principle states that 80% of results come from 20% of efforts. Machiavelli intuitively understood this centuries before economists gave it a name. So your first transformation is identification. What is your 20%? What are the few activities that, if done excellently, would make everything else easier or irrelevant? For most people, it's strategic thinking, key relationships, skill development, and high-leverage execution. Everything else? Noise. Second, you must develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension between opposites without collapsing into one or the other. In this case, the tension between action and inaction. Most people collapse into constant action because stillness feels like failure. But Machiavelli knew that timing is everything. The wise man does at once what the fool does finally. Notice he doesn't say the wise man does everything immediately. He does the right thing at the right moment, which means he spends a lot of time doing nothing, waiting, observing, conserving energy for the decisive moment. This requires a complete rewiring of your psychology. You've been conditioned to feel guilty when you're not visibly productive, when you're sitting quietly thinking rather than checking off tasks, when you're saying no rather than being helpful, when you're unavailable rather than responsive. But this guilt is the very mechanism keeping you trapped. Every time you act from guilt rather than strategy, you reinforce your own subordination. Third, practice strategic unavailability. This is not about being difficult or playing games. It's about understanding that your scarcity creates your value. Machiavelli noted that it is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. But the deeper wisdom is that respect comes from boundaries, not from accommodation. When you're always available, always agreeable, always helpful, people don't respect you more. They respect you less. Because you've taught them you have nowhere else to be, nothing more important to do, no higher priorities than serving their immediate needs. Start small. Don't respond to emails instantly. Build in a buffer, even if it's just 2 hours. This does two things. It trains others that you're not on call, and it gives you time to consider whether a response is even necessary. Machiavelli would ask, does this communication move my position forward? If not, why engage? Not every question deserves an answer. Not every provocation deserves a reaction. Not every crisis is actually your problem. Fourth, eliminate what Machiavelli called the middle ground, the mediocre, half-hearted efforts that consume energy without delivering results. You cannot be strategic while trying to do everything. You must choose. This means saying no to good opportunities so you can say yes to great ones. It means abandoning projects that are merely okay to focus on those that are transformational. It means disappointing people who have small expectations of you so you can exceed the expectations of those who matter most. And here's what you need to prepare for. People will react. When you stop being the person who says yes to everything, who's always available, who works the longest hours, they'll notice. Some will accuse you of changing, of being selfish, of not being a team player. Let them. Machiavelli understood that it is much safer to be feared than loved when one of the two must be lacking. Respect is more valuable than affection. Results are more important than applause. The transformation isn't about becoming cold or calculating in a malicious sense. It's about becoming sovereign over your own time, energy, and strategic direction. It's about understanding that your life is a finite resource and every yes to something trivial is a no to something significant. And most importantly, it's about recognizing that the world will take everything you're willing to give without ever feeling satisfied. So you must be the one who decides what's enough, what's strategic, what deserves your energy. And everything else? Let it burn. But here's what nobody tells you about this transformation. It's lonely at first. When you stop participating in the collective delusion that effort equals value, you'll find yourself on the outside. Your co-workers will bond over their shared exhaustion while you leave at a reasonable hour. Your friends will compete over who's busier while you practice strategic unavailability. Your family might even worry about you, thinking something's wrong because you're not constantly stressed. This is what Jung called the process of individuation, separating from the collective to become your authentic self, and it's never comfortable. Machiavelli understood this isolation intimately. After all, he wrote The Prince while in exile, stripped of power, watching from the outside as lesser men made obvious mistakes he could have prevented. But it was precisely this distance that allowed him to see clearly. Sometimes you need to step out of the game to understand how it's really played. And when you're no longer performing for everyone else's approval, you finally have the mental space to think strategically. Here's a practical framework Machiavelli would approve of. The rule of 3. At the start of each day, identify 3 and only 3 actions that, if completed excellently, would make the day a strategic success. Not 20 tasks, not a packed calendar. 3 high-leverage actions. Everything else is either delegated, delayed, or deleted. This sounds simple, but try it for 1 week and you'll see why most people can't do it. It requires you to make hard choices. It requires you to disappoint people. It requires you to say no to things that seem urgent but aren't important. But this is exactly where Machiavellian efficiency lives, in the ruthless prioritization that most people are too afraid to practice. And when you inevitably face pushback, and you will, remember what Machiavelli wrote. Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see but few can feel. They'll judge you by what they see. Your reduced hours, your selective availability, your strategic no's. But only you can feel the results, the clarity, the effectiveness, the sovereignty. Let them judge. You're no longer optimizing for their comfort. You're optimizing for your impact. This shift from external validation to internal measurement is perhaps the most difficult but most essential part of the transformation. When you finally embrace this Machiavellian approach, doing less but doing it with devastating precision, something profound shifts. First comes the discomfort, the guilt of not working as many hours, the anxiety of not responding immediately, the fear that you're falling behind while others are grinding away. But gradually this discomfort transforms into something else. Clarity, calm, power. You begin to notice that you're accomplishing more in 3 focused hours than you used to in 12 scattered ones. That the projects you said no to freed up energy for the ones that actually mattered. That the people who were angry about your boundaries weren't actually valuable relationships. They were just convenient extractions. And here's what nobody tells you about strategic efficiency. It's peaceful. The exhaustion lifts. The mental fog clears. You stop living in constant reaction mode and start operating from choice. Machiavelli knew what Jung would later articulate. Individuation, becoming your authentic self, requires you to stop performing for others' approval and start operating from your own center. When you do less but do it strategically, you're not just being more productive, you're reclaiming your sovereignty. You're stating through your actions that your energy is precious, your time is limited, and your priorities are non-negotiable. The people who respect this new version of you, those are your people. The ones who can't handle it, they were never really with you. They were just with what you provided. And now that you're selective, now that you're unavailable for their convenience, now that you operate on your terms, they reveal themselves. Some will adapt and become genuine relationships. Others will fade. Both outcomes are wins. You become like the Machiavellian prince, not loved by everyone, but respected by those who matter. Not working the hardest, but achieving the most. Not reacting to every situation, but shaping outcomes through strategic positioning. This is the rebirth. Not into someone colder, but into someone clearer. Not someone who does less because they're lazy, but someone who does less because they've finally understood what Machiavelli knew. Effort is not the same as effectiveness, and effectiveness, not exhaustion, is what the world rewards. Today, we learned from Niccolò Machiavelli that true power lies not in constant motion, but in strategic precision, and from Jung that becoming whole requires us to stop performing exhaustion and start practicing discernment. The transformation from overworked to optimized isn't about working less from weakness. It's about focusing more from wisdom. If these insights sparked a moment of recognition, if you felt that uncomfortable truth that you've been majoring in minor things, hit the like button and share this wisdom with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to join our community of reflective minds, where we explore ideas that don't just inform, but transform how we see ourselves and navigate the world. Are you ready to stop confusing effort with effectiveness? To become strategically unavailable for what doesn't serve you? To do less, but do it with devastating impact? Write in the comments, "I choose strategic efficiency." Let's see how many here are ready to embrace Machiavelli's ruthless wisdom. And remember, the wise man does at once what the fool does finally. Not through harder work, but through clearer thinking. Not through more effort, but through better strategy. The question is, which one will you be? Until we meet again, may you conserve your energy for what truly matters, and may your strategic efficiency compound into extraordinary results. We'll explore more transformative ideas in our next video, ideas that challenge everything you've been taught about success, power, and living authentically. May you find our talks not only educational, but also inspirational, and hopefully, ultimately, transformational. See you next time.